When you stop reacting, something profound happens. The emotional rhythm between you and her collapses. Most people don't realize that attention isn't just a gesture of care, it's a form of emotional currency. Every response you give, every word you speak, every look you exchange, all of it feeds her emotional stability. It tells her, I still have his attention, I still matter. But when you go silent, that certainty disappears. Suddenly, she's no longer in control of the emotional exchange. The very energy that once validated her sense of importance is gone, and her mind begins to race. Silence unsettles her because it disrupts the predictable flow of interaction. She can't read your tone, your words, your emotions, and that ambiguity creates tension. The mind hates uncertainty, especially in relationships where emotions run deep. So, she starts to fill in the gaps herself. She replays conversations, reanalyzes your behavior, tries to interpret the silence. It's no longer about what you said, it's about what you're not saying. This is where silence becomes powerful. It forces awareness. It shifts the emotional power dynamic without you having to say a single word. Instead of reacting impulsively, you allow her to sit with the discomfort of her own actions. And in that discomfort, truth surfaces, truth she might have ignored when things were loud and reactive. It's not about manipulation, it's about energy management, knowing when to step back, when to protect your peace, and when to let silence do what words never could, because sometimes the loudest message isn't spoken. It's felt in the quiet realization that your absence speaks far more than your presence ever did. When you go silent, something shifts not just in her emotions, but in her perception of herself. Attention, whether we realize it or not, acts like a mirror. It reflects back how we see ourselves through the eyes of another. When that mirror disappears, she is left with only her own reflection, raw, unfiltered, and often uncomfortable. Silence takes away the external validation she once relied on, forcing her to sit with her own thoughts and feelings without distraction. That's when true self-reflection begins, not because she chooses to face it, but because she has no other option. You see, as long as you're speaking, explaining, or defending, she doesn't have to look inward. She can project, deflect, and stay in control of the narrative, but silence removes that escape. It confronts her with questions she cannot silence. Why do I feel uneasy? Why does his absence bother me this much? Was I valuing him or just his attention? These are uncomfortable questions, but they are the beginning of emotional maturity. Silence becomes a teacher, revealing what words often conceal. It shows her the difference between wanting connection and needing validation. It exposes how much of her peace depended on your response, your reassurance, your energy. And that awareness is powerful. It humbles, it awakens, and it transforms. So, when you choose silence, you're not punishing her, you're inviting her to grow. You're giving space for understanding to replace ego, for clarity to replace confusion. And sometimes that's the most compassionate thing you can do, because growth rarely happens in noise. It happens in the quiet moments when we are finally forced to face the truth that our reactions have been drowning out all along. The human mind is wired to seek closure. It craves answers, explanations, and resolution, anything that can make sense of emotional uncertainty. When you go silent, you deny her that closure. You interrupt the mental pattern that gives her comfort, and suddenly she's left in a space of ambiguity. That space is uncomfortable because the brain cannot rest without a conclusion. So it keeps looping, replaying past conversations, analyzing every word, every expression, every silence. It's not just emotional confusion, it's psychological unrest. This is why silence feels so heavy. It forces her to live with unanswered questions, and that unease begins to consume her thoughts. When people can't predict what comes next, their minds create stories to fill the gap. She may start wondering what you're thinking, what you're feeling, or whether you've moved on. And in that overthinking, she's not only trying to understand you, she's being confronted by her own attachment, her need for control, her discomfort with uncertainty. What makes silence so powerful is that it doesn't provide her with the closure she wants, but it gives her the lesson she needs. It teaches her that not everything deserves an explanation, and not every situation will end on her terms. It challenges the part of her that seeks dominance in emotional dynamics, reminding her that control is an illusion when someone has the strength to withdraw peacefully. And that's the beauty of silence. It doesn't scream, it doesn't argue, yet it shakes the foundation of what she thought she understood, because the absence of answers often reveals more truth than words ever could. It reminds her that sometimes the real closure isn't in what's said, it's in what's left unsaid. Emotional power doesn't come from speaking the loudest, it comes from mastering your silence. When you choose not to react, you shift the entire dynamic of the interaction. In that moment, you stop playing the emotional game she's trying to pull you into. You're no longer feeding her with validation, arguments, or emotional energy. You're showing her that your peace isn't up for negotiation. In that calmness, that unshakable composure becomes the loudest statement you can make. Silence reveals who truly holds control over their emotions. Most people react impulsively because they fear being misunderstood or ignored. But when you've grown beyond that fear, when you understand that you don't need to prove your worth, silence becomes your strength. It shows maturity, it shows awareness. It communicates that you're not driven by ego, but by clarity. She begins to feel that shift too, when she can no longer provoke a reaction, when your calmness meets her chaos, the power dynamic reverses. She starts questioning herself instead of questioning you. The attention she once demanded now becomes the attention she gives, and the reason is simple: energy flows toward what is still, not what is desperate. Philosophically, silence is presence in its highest form. It's choosing to be grounded rather than reactive. It's the art of letting your peace speak for itself, and the one who can remain composed in silence always stands in a position of quiet power, not because they control others, but because they've mastered themselves. So remember, real strength doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to win arguments. It just stands still, unbothered, unwavering, and untouchable. That's when silence stops being withdrawal and becomes authority. Respect isn't earned through dominance or loud confrontation. It's earned through restraint. When you learn to stay silent instead of reacting emotionally, you communicate something powerful without saying a word. You have control over yourself. And that self-control commands respect. Silence in moments of tension isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's the recognition that not every situation deserves your energy, and not every word spoken deserves a response. Emotional detachment doesn't mean indifference, it means you've learned to separate your peace from the behavior of others. You're no longer tied to the cycle of reaction and regret. You've risen above it. When she sees that her words or actions no longer have the power to shake you, a subtle shift happens. The same silence that once frustrated her now earns her respect, because deep down, everyone respects the one who doesn't get easily moved. Philosophically, silence represents self-mastery. It's what separates those who live reactively from those who live intentionally. By refusing to be dragged into emotional chaos, you teach others how to treat you. You show that your boundaries are firm, not through anger, but through absence. You make it clear that your peace isn't something you're willing to sacrifice for temporary validation or unnecessary conflict. This level of emotional discipline creates a kind of presence that speaks louder than confrontation ever could. It's calm, it's confident, and it's deeply respected even by those who once tried to test it. So, the next time you're tempted to explain, to defend, to prove your point, pause. Let your silence speak for you, because the moment you stop reacting to chaos, you stop being part of it, and that's where true respect begins, not demanded, but quietly earned. At first, silence feels like distance. She may tell herself that she doesn't care, that your quiet doesn't affect her, but over time, something shifts. The absence begins to echo louder than your words ever did. The moments she once took for granted your attention, your consistency, your presence start to stand out in her memory. That's the paradox of silence. It's invisible in the moment but undeniable in reflection. It forces her to measure what your presence truly meant, not through what you said, but through what she now feels missing. When you go silent, she starts to reevaluate not just you, but herself. She begins to realize the difference between attraction and attachment, between control and connection. She starts to question whether she appreciated your effort or simply expected it. And as her mind unravels these layers, she begins to understand something she couldn't see before. Silence was never punishment. It was consequence. It was life showing her what happens when genuine presence is undervalued. Philosophically, silence creates space for awareness. It strips away noise, leaving only truth. It reveals what was real and what was convenience, what was love and what was ego. That's why silence hurts, because it's honest. It doesn't argue, it doesn't justify, it simply reflects reality back to the person who tried to ignore it. So when you choose silence, understand that you're not erasing yourself from her life, you're allowing her to finally see you clearly, without distraction. And that realization will echo long after words have faded. Because in the end, silence doesn't just make her miss you, it makes her recognize your worth. And that's a truth far louder than any explanation could ever be.